Okay. All right. So we are on Masechet Beitzah Daf Daled Amud Alef near the bottom. We started getting into now. We're going to have these three consecutive cases, three machlokot, regarding where we have 2 days, 2 consecutive days of kedusha, and what is going to be the din of a Beitzah, which was laid on one, regarding the other. So the first case is going to be regarding Shabbat and Yom Tov. The second case is going to be regarding 2 days of Yom Tov, something which does not apply in Eretz Yisrael, Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiyot, and the third one is going to be the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, which does apply in Israel, and we'll see the differences between those 2 cases as well. So we saw yesterday, we'll pick it up from 3 lines down, 3 words in and 3 lines down from the wide lines. Itmar, so Shabbat veYom Tov, we have a machloket amoraim regarding when you have Shabbat and Yom Tov. Rashi points out here, by the way, he says Shabbat v'Yom Tov asmuchin v'hu adin liyom Tov v'Shabbat. There's no, it's immaterial here which order it goes in. If it's Yom Tov before Shabbat or Shabbat before Yom Tov, okay. If Shabbat v'Yom Tov v'Rabbi Amar noda b'zeh asura b'zeh v'Rabbi Yochanan Amar noda b'zeh mutelet b'zeh. So Rav says, we'll have to see who we paskin like, but Rav says that if the egg was laid on one day, it is still going to be forbidden the next day. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you have it, the egg's laid on Shabbat, you can eat it on Yom Tov, or vice versa. Again, just because it's a little bit confusing, we mentioned it yesterday, but I'll just say it again, that this is not the case of Hachana de Rabbah. The case there that Rabbi spoke about before in our Mishnah was that was Yom Tov after Shabbat, but it was on the Yom Tov, which is after Shabbat, on that day the egg is laid, and on that day it would be forbidden. Here we're saying the egg was laid the previous day, and whether it's now forbidden the next day or not. So as we saw, that is Machloket Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara asks why. What's behind it? Option of one name, Rav Kedusha Achati. We'll see that in the upcoming cases that is going to be the svara. When we get to Rosh Hashanah, for example, we'll say it's Kedusha Achat, the 2 days. But so over here, would you say, if you say that it's Kedusha Achat, that Shabbat and Yom Tov, these 2 consecutive days, is one long Kedusha, therefore it makes sense why if it's Muktzah on one day, it will be Muktzah on the next. Name Rav Kedusha Achati. V'amarav halacha k'arbaz kenim v'ali b'd Rabbi Eliezer. We mentioned that yesterday. That's from the Gemara in Eruvin. There you see Rav says explicitly that no, he does hold that Shabbat and Yom Tov are 2 separate kedushot. Again, the nafkamina would be for Eruvei Tchumin, not types of Eruv, which you could have 2 separate ones. But he says it's 2 kedushot, so that knocks out that havamin. Rather, the machloket between them is regarding Hachana de Rabbah. Again, not the same case, but it's the same principle. Rav it le'achana de Rabbah, Rabbi Yochanan it le'achana de Rabbah. So we see that Rav holds by the principle of Hachana of Rabbah, and Rabbi Yochanan does not. So now again, it's different. We saw Tosfot yesterday. It's not quite the same as the case of which Rabbah brought originally, where the Hachana was done in the sense that the egg was prepared, quote unquote, inside the body of the chicken before it was laid. Here, the preparation is done actually by the laying of the egg, and that was Tosfot's question. Although it's not the same, it is still, there is a certain element of Hachana there, and that's why it would be forbidden, according to Rav. According to Rav, Rabbi Yochanan, as we said, does not subscribe by that. That makes sense, by the way. We've already seen Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara told us that Rabbi Yochanan's explanation of the Mishnah goes along the premise that it is the gezerah of mashkin shazavu, right? If it he doesn't hold by Hachana, so he clearly does not agree with Rabbah, but he holds like it's mashkin shazavu over there. Okay, so Rav Le'achana de Rabbah, Rabbi Yochanan Le'achana de Rabbah. Now it says Ketanai. Not only is this a machloket amoraim, we're about halfway down the wide lines. Not only is this a machloket amoraim, it is also a machloket tanaim. Ketanai noda b'Shabbat te'achel b'Yom Tov, v'Yom Tov te'achel b'Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer adayin hi machloket. Shebeit Shammai omrim te'achel, u'Beit Hillel omrim lo te'achel. So says the Beitzah like this. It says noda b'Shabbat. If an egg is laid on Shabbat, can be eaten on Yom Tov, or if it's laid on Yom Tov, can be eaten on Shabbat when they are consecutive days. And then Rabbi Yehuda says that's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, no, that is still part of the machloket. Beit Shammai amrim ta'achel, Beit Hillel amrim lo ta'achel. So again, that would depend on whether we say the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is dependent on Hachana d'Rabba, and that would be the opinion that says there's machloket here. Right, let's just see Rashi for a moment. Rashi, the second of the wide lines, he says Hachana d'Rabba. He says Da'amar Hachana b'dei Shamayim mitzra miyom tov l'Shabbat. Right, Rabbi taught us that Hachana, even when it's done b'dei Shamayim, which is the preparation of the egg, not something that human beings do, but it's done naturally. Mitzara, that type of preparation, that is going to be forbidden from Yom Tov to Shabbat. The Sudat Shabbat by Hazmana. The Sudat of Shabbat needs designation. Miyom Chol, from the day of Chol. Migzerat HaKatuv. That's what we learned earlier on, and we discussed there as well why it is that only Sudat Shabbat needs a designation, not Sudat Chol. Okay, he says Adayni Machloket, Beit Shammai or Beit Hillel, Bezeh, meaning that this is also Machloket of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, Kashem Shenechlaku Lebo Bayom. Right, we know explicitly in our Mishnah that they have a machloket regarding the egg that's on the day that it's laid, whether they have a machloket regarding the next day, that is a machloket Tanaim as to whether that is also part of this machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Now the Gemara tells us a couple of stories. It says, Ushpizichne Rav Ada bar Ahava Havolei Anach Beitzim Miyom Tov LeShabbat. So the story is, so there was a guest or somebody was staying with Rav Ada bar Ahava. Sorry, Rav Ada bar Ahava was the guest, right? Ushpizichne, Rashi says, is Balabayit, and he had Havolei Hanach Beitzim Miyom Tov LeShabbat. So there were these eggs which were laid on Yom Tov, right? And the question was what to do on Shabbat. It says Rashi, Miyom Tov LeShabbat Hayom Nodu Vayal Tzeloch Lanem Achal b'Shabbat. In other words, the eggs were laid, exactly our case. The eggs were laid on Yom Tov, and he wanted to eat them on Shabbat. So Atalekame, so he came to Rav Ada bar Ahava, and he said, Mai la'atvinu ha'idna v'nichlinu lemachar. So what is it then? Can we cook them now? Again, because it was on Yom Tov. Obviously on Shabbat you can't cook them. Can we cook the eggs that were laid today on Yom Tov, and then we can eat them tomorrow on Shabbat? La'atvinu, says Rashi, litzlotana idna. Can we cook them now? In other words, are they going to be muktzah? So answers back Rav Ada bar Ahava. He says, "My datech." He says, "What's your question? Are you saying Rav Rabbi Yochanan halachak Rabbi Yochanan? Meaning, are you going on the assumption? The question whether we can eat them tomorrow is a machloket between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rav says no. Rabbi Yochanan says yes. So if you're going on the assumption that we paskin Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, we paskin halacha like Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore they're going to be permitted tomorrow. He says, even then, says Rav Ada bar Ahava, that doesn't mean we can cook them today, right? He says, Afil Rabbi Yochanan lo kashali, meaning what Rabbi Yochanan said was that the next day they'd be permitted, not today. Everybody agrees that the day the egg is laid, it's still going to be muktzah on Yom Tov. He says tomorrow you can crack it open and swallow it. Right, as we've discussed, good for your voice. But to cook them today they're still muktzah according to everybody, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. Vatanya, and he has a proof for it. Vatanya, and Rashi points out that Vatanya he has the siyata. This is a proof. Often when we say Hatanya will be a challenge. It's not a challenge, it's a siyata. He says Hatanya achat beitzah shnoda b'Shabbat v'achat beitzah shnoda b'Yom Tov. We've seen this bright already. Ein mitaltelin ota lo lachasot b'atakli v'lo lismoch b'kirei amita. Right, so an egg which is laid on Shabbat or on Yom Tov, you cannot carry it. You can't use it to cover up a flask or something like that. You can't use it to stand up your bed or your table. In other words, it's muktzah. On the day, it's muktzah, and that is according to everybody. Let's just see. Rashi over there points that out, but the Rashi before, where he says, "My datech," he says, where Rav Ada bar Ahava is asking, he says, "The pshit alach." Even if it's obvious to you that it's going to be permitted the next day, right? We generally speaking have a principle. Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, we hold the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. He's a meal, but tiltul ha'idna asire. Nonetheless, now to carry it, now it's going to be muktzah. Tafir Rabbi Yochanan loshari letzlota yom. Even Rabbi Yochanan would not allow to cook it today. Ela gomala machar imaya yom tov kodem l'Shabbat. Only just to eat it tomorrow if it was yom tov before Shabbat. On its day, you cannot and you can't even carry it. If it's Shabbat and then Yom Tov, so it's going to be easier because on Yom Tov, when it's no longer muktzah, then you could cook it. Okay, so that is story number one. Story number two, another case of Ushpizichne. Ushpizichne to Rav Papa. The Amile Ha'u Gafra. Okay, so the person who Rav Papa was staying by, or it was just some individual, Rav Papa, who came to Rav Papa. Okay, so the same case, he had eggs which were laid on Shabbat and he wanted to use them for Yom Tov. So he came to him and he said, so he came to him the person came to Rav Papa on Shabbat and he said, what's the din of these eggs for tomorrow? Can I eat them tomorrow on Yom Tov? Amalahu Zil. Zil ha'idna v'tala machar. Rav Papa said, go away and come back and ask me again tomorrow. Okay, why is that? The Rav lo muki amora ilave miyom hatov lechavrei mishum shichrut. He says because he would not. Let's see how Rashi translates it, explains it. He says the Rav lo muki amora ilave. Amora here is like a meturgaman. Like in those days when the Amoraim would give a drasha, so they would speak softly, and there would be somebody who would be staying at not exactly a translator, but it would be saying things louder to the kahal. So he says, he would not give his drasha on Yom Tov. What does it mean from Yom Tov to the next? Says Rashi, in other words, from the time of the Yom Tov Suda, I guess would apply for Shabbat as well, he would not give his, once he'd had the Suda, once he'd started, he would not give the drasha until the next day. It says Mishum Shichrut, because it might be drunk. We know we have, again, in those days, they weren't really drinking orange juice and Coke and all these other things. And at your meal, you would drink water or you drink wine. And we find many, many cases where there is a chashash once the meal started, in terms that a person may get drunk or even a little bit. Explains here Rashi, Mishum Shichrut, the Rav Uroye Haya More Bidrasha Shelo, he would give his drasha, he wouldn't just give votim, he would give Piskei Halacha. V'shikol asur lot. One who is drunk, or one who is drunk a revit of wine, is not allowed to give psak halacha because their judgment may be impaired. V'shechal tesht uchtiv le'olot et bnei Israel. That's why it's learned out from the psukim relating to the kohanim. But so that's the case. So he wouldn't give the drasha at that point because he may be drunk. So he said to him, "I've already had my suda. I've already drank some wine. I can't answer you now. Come back tomorrow." So. Right, so the person asked the question: Can he, this egg which was laid on Shabbat, can he now eat it the next day? So he said, "We'll come back the next day. You'll find out." So ki'ata lemachar, he came back the next day, Amarlo, and he said to him, we're now over the page on the top of Amud-Bet. He said, "Icho hashta ishtalai." So if really I'd answered you yesterday, then I would have made a mistake. And I would have said to you that halacha, we know that between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, the principle is halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan, therefore it would have said that it's mutar. However, it says Hama Rava Hilchata, we're going to see this later on the next daf. Rava says Hilchata Kvatei de Rav B'anei Tlat Ben Lekula Ben Lechumra. In these three cases that we're discussing, three cases that we'll see. We've seen one of them, which are machloka between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rava says the halacha follows, although generally speaking, the principles we follow Rabbi Yochanan, here the halacha is going to follow Rav. Bein lekula, bein lechumra. We'll see whether he's more lenient or he's more stringent. In this case, he's more stringent. So if Papa is saying to this person, it's a good job I didn't answer you yesterday, because yesterday I would have made a mistake, and I would have said that the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan. But actually, in this case, the halacha is going to follow Rav. and it's going to be it's still going to be asur the next day because of the principle of hachana. So Rashi here says, if I'd given you the answer yesterday when I was a little bit drunk, ishtalai shachachti v'shagagti, I would have made a mistake. Va'iti moleh bo heter, I would have told you it's permitted. Mishum the kaimanan b'shaduchte Rav Rabbi Yochanan lachak Rabbi Yochanan, because in other places we do say halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan over Rav. It's a good job. I postponed you and delayed you until today. Now I remember. Says Rashi, these three things. Shamar li'inyan Beitzah zo mishabat v'yom tov. So our case is the Beitzah going from Shabbat to Yom Tov, or Shabbat or Yom Tov to Shabbat, vice versa. Ulekame b'shnei yamim tovim shel galuyot nichlak la'akel. So over here we see the Rav is machmir. We're going to see in the next case, says Rashi, when it's Shnei Yamim to Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, there Rav is going to be the one who is maker. V'ashlishi, in the third case, B'shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah Nechlak Lachmir. Regarding the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, there Rav is going to be machmir. So it's not a case of whether we are maker or machmir. It's a case that we follow Rav, and we're consistent with his opinion in these 3 cases. So case number 1, bottom line is Machlok Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, if the egg which is laid on Shabbat or Yom Tov, and then for the next day, it's going to be forbidden. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, on the 4th line now in the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, etzim shenashru min hadekel b'Shabbat, asur lasikan b'Yom Tov, al tesheveni Beitzah. So now a new case. The case is you have wood, branches which fell off the tree on Shabbat. So again, the similarity is that we have Shabbat followed by Yom Tov. This case would only apply when it's Shabbat first and Yom Tov second. This case won't apply Yom Tov first and Shabbat second because you can't do anything with the Eitzim on Shabbat. You can, in theory, use them for firewood on Yom Tov. So he says, Eitzim shnashru min hadekel, these branches fell off the tree on Shabbat. Right, Asur, says Rabbi Yochanan consistently. Sorry, not consistently. Rabbi Yochanan was the one who previously, regarding the Beitzah, said it's going to be mutar the next day. So here he says it's going to be asur. He says asur lasikan b'Yom Tov. You cannot use them now on Yom Tov, which is the next day. And immediately he says, Rabbi Yochanan, al teshiveni Beitzah. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, Rabbi Yochanan, you're being inconsistent. You told me that if an egg was laid on Shabbat, that you could eat the egg on Yom Tov. Now you're telling me that, again, always when the 2 days are consecutive. Now you're telling me that if the branches of the tree fall off on Shabbat, you can't use them on Yom Tov. Well, surely it's the same as the case of the Beitzah, and then it should be permitted. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan says, Al teshiveni Beitzah. He says, I know what I said about an egg, but this case is different. Why is this case different? My time. Beitzah, mishum devayom anami chazia logoma, v'lo kashalila demachal, meida yadia devat yoma asal. He says, with an egg, since you could, in theory, have a use for it on the day, right? As we've seen, on Shabbat, you could swallow that egg. So it's potentially permissible on Shabbat itself. Okay. But nonetheless, we say there, lo kashari la'ad machal. We say we judge it as muktzah on Shabbat, and you can only use it on Yom Tov. So meida yadia devat yoma asarua. Everybody will know, everybody understands that on that day, it's still going to be forbidden. It's not that an egg in general would be muktzeh, but it's that this egg is muktzeh. We understand that. However, eitzim, but the eitzim, the wood, which you can't do anything with on that day, because on Shabbat, the eitzim are going to be muktzeh, always, not just these eitzim that fell off the tree, any eitzim. So, so if you will permit them the next day, so then you're going to cause confusion, and people will think that that in fact it's permitted on the first day, that it's permitted on Shabbat as well. It's quite similar to the svara that we saw before regarding Yom Tov and Muktzah, where we said that by Shabbat, since the Shabbat is more machmir, we can be more lenient regarding Muktzah. But by Yom Tov, where you have certain melachot which are allowed in the first place, we're worried that if we're too lenient, people come to be mazalzen. So similar sort of logic here. So that is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Again, etzim shenashum minadeka b'Shabbat asur lasekan b'Yom Tov. Ve'al teshiveni Beitzah. Don't bring a proof from the case of Beitzah, which Rashi says, al teshiveni Beitzah. Shamarti ba noda b'zeh muteret b'zeh. Dachashayach lemeisa tvei. Here we have more grounds. Here we have more grounds to be stringent. The Beitzah, the reason why we said it was, why I said, Rabbi Yochanan, that it's permitted the next day is because on that day, on Shabbat, it is theoretically permissible. But nonetheless, we don't allow it in this instance at the Machal. Therefore, therefore, everybody will know that on that day it's forbidden. However, wood which is not fitting, it has no use on that day, it's forbidden, it's muktzeh anyway on Shabbat. If I then permit it the next day, then people will think that actually on that day it was permitted as well, and they will come to earn that way. So Rashi says, "Maitama Beitzah kevan de v'yoma ilav da'asila mishum denoda b'Shabbat havachazia legoma chaya." Right, that's what we said, that if if it wasn't for the fact that the egg was laid on Shabbat, it would be permitted because there are people sheyesh bnei adam gomin ken who that's how they eat an egg. V'lo shali le ad lemachal meidei adiyah. He says ki shalit le lemachal. When you now say that it's forbidden, the egg is permitted for the next day. V'tmo lo shalit, and yesterday it was not. Devat yoma asila, because it was just for that day that it was forbidden. Aval etzim. The Shabbat kevan de v'yomayu belav isur muktzeh nami lo chazo she'en meval inesh b'Shabbat. Meaning with the wood it's different. He says because the wood would be essential. He says yeah muktzeh, but I think it means that there would be muktzeh anyway. He says if you did not have this specific isur muktzeh, nonetheless there is no use for this wood because you can't burn it on Shabbat. Therefore, ishalilu. If you're allowed the next day, people will come to say what? People think that in other words, that people think that on Yom Tov, right? This is where the mistake is going to come. That if the wood fell off the tree on Yom Tov itself, people think that on that Yom Tov it will be permitted. Say the reason why yesterday it wasn't was because it's Shabbat, but it wasn't because of the fact that it fell off the tree on Shabbat. Right? So therefore, if it falls off the tree on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, you'll come to think that on that day the wood will be permitted, and that is why Rabbi Yochanan said, right? That is Rabbi Yochanan. Rav clearly would say that it's asur in any event. Okay. Next case in the Gemara related to these eitzim. He says, Amar Rav Matna. Eitzim shenashlu min hadekel letoch hatanur. Okay, so the wood now we know that you can't move it. We know you can't pick it up because it's going to be muktzeh. But if the branches fell from the tree, fell straight into the oven. And the ovens in those days looked a little bit different than our ovens look. But you have essentially this big clay container, maybe with a hole on top, maybe with a hole underneath. And so the wood falls down, and that's where you put the fire. It falls directly into the oven. So Amar Eitzim shenashlu min hadekel letoch hatanur b'Yom Tov. Malbeh alehem eitzim muchanim umesikan. So he says, we know we have a principle of rov, majority throughout many different halachot in Shas, throughout the Torah, not just in Ilchot Kashrut, but it's in Ilchot Sukkah and Ilchot Muktzah as well in different places. Says Rav Matne, if these branches which are muktzah fell into your oven, what you should do is bring other pieces of wood which are not muktzah, right, and make those the majority, and then altogether those the original pieces that were muktzah will be batel barov, and then you can use it. Right? Eitzim shenashlu min hadekel letoch hatanur b'Yom Tov mabeh alehem eitzim muchanim umesikan. Ask the Gemara, meaning when you are adding them in and you're mixing it all up together, you are going to be involved in moving the muktzah wood as well. Says Rashi, right? You're bringing them into the oven from one side to the other. So answer the Gemara, Kevan de Luba Betela Ninu Kika Me'apech Betela Kamapech. So he says, no, well, since when you add them in, since now the majority are mutar, are not muktzah, therefore, when you're moving them around, it's already been batel barov, and therefore it's all permitted pieces, non-muktzah pieces of wood that you are engaged with. So ask the Gemara, wait a minute. Major principle which comes up, and again, primarily very, very relevant to the world of kashrut, other places as well. The question of mevatel isur lekatchila. Right? Whenever it comes to nullification and bitul barov, we know that bitul barov is said when something happens inadvertently. But when you come along and do it intentionally, that is mevatel isur lekatchila. You are intentionally coming and nullifying the isur. And who says that you're allowed to do that? There's a big discussion, by the way, amongst the Rishonim as to what the parameters are of mevatel isur lekatchila. Is it an isur d'oraita? Is it an isur d'rabanan? We won't get into that now. But that's regarding whether the prohibition of bitul isur lekatchila is d'oraita or d'rabanan. But here the Gemara makes a different distinction. It says, so suggestion number one, it says like this: Hanay mile bidoraita, aval bidorabanan mevatlin. So again, the question is the isur which we are being mevatel, the isur that you are nullifying. If that is an isur, according to this opinion, if that is an isur doraita in the first place, then we say the principle of ein mevatlin isur applies. But if that was an isur d'rabanan, then according to this opinion, you could go and you could be mevatel an isur d'rabanan, right? The challenge on that is going to be, maybe we'll just read the question, and with that we'll end for today. It says, Rav Ashi, De'amar kol davar sheyesh lo matilin, afilu b'drabanan lo batil ma'ika l'meima. Rashi says, hang on, we have a problem. Even if we say that will make a difference between Doraita and Rabbanan, again, here we're dealing with Muktzeh. So Muktzeh is an Isur Rabbanan. But nonetheless, we have another problem. We saw this earlier. We saw this concept of a Davar sheyesh lo matirin. Davar sheyesh lo matirin is something which is forbidden now, but at some point, by itself, it's going to become permitted. Right? So Muktzeh would be an example that on Shabbat it is going to be Asur, but after Shabbat it's no longer Muktzeh because it's not Shabbat anymore, it doesn't apply. So that could be a Davar sheyesh lo matirin. So Rav Ashi says, and we know that Davar sheyesh lo matirin has certain stringencies associated with it. So Rav Ashi says, if you have a Davar sheyesh lo matirin, so never mind bitul isur lekatchila, that's not the issue. The issue is that it doesn't have bitul. It's not going to be nullified. Saw this before with the Beitzah about the sfeik with the egg, where it was a sfeik. We asked, was it a sfeik treifa or a sfeik Shabbat and Yom Tov? Right. So he says, since the Davar sheyesh lo matirin, there is no bitul, and therefore our original question is going to stand. But we'll stop there. And we'll pick that up next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.